This chapter, Chapter 7, is longer than I wanted, so I split it into 2 sections. If you haven't enjoyed the first section, please do so.
Alan replied, plate now attached to 1944 Ford pickup. About milepost 10 County Road 5. Vehicle seems abandoned, 1053, blocking road. 1052, wrecker needed. I will check this out, 104? Unit MV03, 104. Alan killed his engine, pocketed the keys, and got out to investigate. As he approached the old pickup, he noted that one side of the road had a field of ripening corn and the other side was lined with a bar ditch, seemingly overgrown with weeds. Alan cautiously approached the pickup. In doing so, he had to turn his back on the bar ditch. Cautious, Alan peered into the truck, at which time 2 gunshots rang out, and Alan dropped to the road. He felt the bullet rip through his left shoulder, and he began to pass out. With his last ounce of consciousness, he keyed his radio mic, dispatch, Unit MV03, officer down. With that Alan lost consciousness. Unit MV04, officer down. County Road 5, milepost 10. 1052, ambulance dispatched, 1039, lights and siren. Amber replied, 104. Dispatch. Call the clinic, and have Dr. Smith waiting for me with her trauma kit. The dispatch replied, don't you mean Dr. Phillips? Amber yelled, if I meant Dr. Phillips, I would have said Dr. Phillips, I want Dr. Smith, 104? The reply was, 104. Amber had heard Alan's message and knew that if anyone in the world would give everything to save his life, it would be Susan. Amber screeched to a halt at the clinic door. Susan was waiting for her. She jumped into the patrol car and buckled herself in. As they raced to the scene, Susan asked, Amber, what's happened? Why me? Amber answered in short, loud sentences, officer down. It's Alan, that's all I know. You, because no one else would care more than you. You'll do anything to save his life. Now, shut up and let me get us there in one piece. Susan sat quietly, nerves on fire. She desperately wanted to ask more questions, but she also knew that Amber wanted to focus on the patrol car, the road, and the speed. Susan began to think about this incident. Amber was Alan's partner. No other deputy cared as much as Amber. She wanted to ask Amber a very important question. She didn't, but she wanted to ask Amber if she was in love with Alan. She knew the answer. Amber was very much in love with Alan. But she was also very much in love with her husband and their family. Amber would naturally have answered, yes, she loved Alan, like a brother. But Susan knew better, and she loved Amber for it. It was a short time later, but to Amber and Susan, it seemed like an eternity. They arrived on the scene. Amber keyed her radio, dispatch, Unit MV041023, arrived on scene. ETA ambulance? Amber got out of the squad car. Susan, stay here while I check things out, and she low-crawled over to try and find Alan. Her radio replied, ETA ambulance 10 minutes. Amber turned and looked at Susan, I found Alan. Come here around this old truck. Susan got out and walked crouching low around the old truck. She saw Alan and a lot of blood. Amber came around the truck, and the two pulled Alan back behind the patrol car. Susan tore his shirt off and began to stop the bleeding. As she worked, her heart raced. She had to save him. All she could think of was how much she loved this man, and she had to keep him alive. She turned him, but there was no exit wound. She gave him a shot of morphine, bandaged the wound, and prayed, Lord, keep Alan alive, please. This was the prayer she uttered over and over again. The ambulance arrived, and the crew took the litter and put Alan on it. As they began to put him into the ambulance, Susan stepped over to get in as well, but the ambulance crew stopped her. Mrs. Smith, you can't ride with him. Susan looked at the crew. I am Dr. Smith, and this is my patient. I ride with him. The crew's eyes flew open. Yes, ma'am. Susan leaned out and called, Amber, you coming? Amber called back, right behind you. The ambulance crew asked, Dr. Smith, what instructions do you have for the emergency room? She thought, I'll need Dr. Phillips' help in the OR. Bullet is still in his chest, need whole blood, type O negative. I've temporarily stopped the bleeding and gave standard dose of morphine. Lots of prayer. The ambulance crewman replied, "Yes, ma'am." Then he radioed the emergency room with her instructions. Amber had called the sheriff and informed him of what she knew about the incident. Sheriff Murdoch instructed her to accompany the ambulance. He would send a team of officers to investigate the incident. She began to follow the ambulance, praying as Susan was, "Lord, keep Alan alive, please." The thought of losing Alan, her partner, was horrifying. She could hardly breathe, but she hung in there until they arrived at the hospital. The ER crew was standing by waiting for the ambulance to come to a stop. Then they rushed to the vehicle and took Alan into the ER, Susan and Amber following close behind. Dr. Phillips opened the door to the operating room and helped to place Alan on the operating table. He looked at Susan. "You okay?" Susan answered, "No, but I have to get that bullet out of him and stop the bleeding." She directed the ER nurse to start the IV and blood as she stripped off her outer garments and donned the standard scrubs. Dr. Phillips said, "Susan, Dr. Smith, take 2 deep breaths, relax, Alan needs you to focus." She smiled at David, took 2 deep breaths and began to scrub up. Then she approached Alan and began the operation. Under the watchful eye of Dr. Phillips, Susan worked deliberately to remove the bullet and stop the bleeding. As she watched David close the wound and began to clean Alan up, David looked over at an exhausted Susan and told her to go lie down for a little while. "I'll finish up here." She simply nodded, picked up her street clothes and left the OR as Susan came out. Amber came up to her. "How is he?" Susan put her arms around Amber and sighed, "He's going to be all right." Both began to cry in pure relief. Sheriff Murdoch came in and asked, "Susan, how's my deputy?" She smiled a tired smile and replied, "He's going to be okay, John, he's going to be okay." The sheriff put his long arms around both ladies. "Roger can stay with us for a while. Amber, take the rest of the day off. Just be alert, we don't know the who or why of this case." Amber smiled. "Okay, tomorrow then." She left the hospital and went home. At home, Amber put her arms around her husband and cried. Paul held Amber for a long time and then asked, "Why the tears, dear?" She replied, "Alan was shot, and Susan and I went to get him. Someone shot him in the left shoulder, very close to his heart. Somehow, he got into the bar ditch. When we got there, Susan and I had to carry him to the patrol car. Susan worked on him while I watched for the sniper. The ambulance got there and took Alan to the hospital. Susan and David worked on Alan for 3 hours. But he's going to be all right. I'm crying because I'm very tired, I'm very relieved, and I love you so much. Thank you for being here with me." Paul smiled at his wife, "I'll always be here for you." Susan changed back into her street clothes and went into the recovery room. She started toward Alan when the charge nurse, Ashley, said, "You can't come in here." Susan started, "I'm Dr. Smith. Deputy Smith is my patient. I'll come in here as I see fit." Ashley was taken aback. "Oh, Dr. Smith, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you." "Of course, you may come in here." Susan smiled a tired smile. "It's okay. I'm going home. Please call me if there is any problem." Ashley walked over to Susan and gave her a quick hug. "I'll take good care of him." Then Susan spoke. "Sheriff Murdoch said to be alert. We don't know the who or why of this attack. The sheriff has a deputy outside if there is anything. ... Ashley answered, "The sheriff told me. Don't worry, go home and get some rest." Susan began to cry. "How can I relax when he's here?" Susan turned and walked slowly out to her car and drove home. At home, Susan called the Murdochs and asked them to send Roger home. When Roger got home, she asked if he had eaten. Roger told her, "No." Susan asked, "And what would you like tonight?" "Something that your dad would like too." Roger answered, "But Mom, Dad isn't here." Susan replied, "I'll take some to him in the hospital. He would like some home-cooked comfort food." "What do you think he would like?" Roger smiled. "He really likes macaroni and cheese with hamburger in it." She smiled at Roger. "Then let's make some." "I've never made macaroni and cheese, have you?" Roger rubbed his hands together. "I helped Dad make it." "Well," she began, "tell me what to do." First, you fry up a pound of hamburger and pour off the grease. Then you boil up the macaroni. Dad says, boil the macaroni until it's to the tooth. Then you make up the cheese sauce and mix it all together and serve. Dad uses the cheddar and melts it down, slowly adding milk. Susan began. Okay, first fry up a pound of hamburger. Where does Dad keep the hamburger? Roger replied, in the freezer. Susan asked, how does he fry frozen hamburger? Roger rolled his eyes, he puts it in the microwave on defrost. She looked at Roger, well, I guess you can get it out of the freezer and put it in the microwave. Roger smiled. Okay. Very enthusiastically together, mother and son made up the macaroni and cheese. Tasting it, Roger approved, that's just like Dad makes. Susan and Roger sat down, prayed for Alan, gave thanks and ate. Then Susan took the leftover mac and cheese and took it to the hospital for Alan. Roger and she visited with Alan while he ate what she brought. Alan was very glad to be with his little family. He looked at Susan, honey, when can I go home? She answered, I'll talk to David tomorrow. I don't see any reason why you can't go home tomorrow. I'll just have to have someone look after you while I'm at work. He sighed, who would you ask? She thought and said, well, the county is paying the bill for you to be here. Maybe I could get Sheriff Murdoch to send one of his deputies around a couple of times a day to check up on you. He could have your radio set near you for emergencies. After visiting for an hour, Roger and Susan kissed Alan and went home. The next day, Susan called the sheriff and asked about a deputy checking up on Alan at home while she was at work. Sheriff Murdoch agreed that it would save money. When Alan gets home, just let me know, and I'll send Amber around to set up the radio and check up on him. Susan answered, Amber? The sheriff replied, yes, Amber. She is his partner. Susan said, that would be ideal. She is a doctor and would know what to do in case of a problem. I'm going to ask David if he might perceive a problem with Alan going home tomorrow. Sheriff Murdoch replied, like I said, just let me know. Goodbye, Susie. The next day when Susan arrived at work, she asked David about Alan going home. She explained that Sheriff Murdoch would send Amber around periodically to check up on Alan. David agreed that the home environment would be best. He suggested that they both go to the hospital and arrange for Alan's release. She could drive him home and see that he was comfortable, and then she could return to the clinic. They went and made the arrangements, signed the release, and Susan drove Alan home. Before leaving the clinic, Susan called the sheriff and told him that Alan was going to be released in about an hour. He arranged for Amber to meet Alan and Susan to set up an emergency radio and ensure she knew what she would be expected to do on her checks. Home. Alan was very glad to be home. Susan would come home to fix lunch. Amber would be listening for a call on the radio, and best of all, in 2 weeks, school would be out for the summer and Roger could be with him until he could navigate on his own. But there was still the problem of who shot him. Was this attack just a random shooting of a cop? Or was it revenge? These questions were on the mind of the entire sheriff's department, especially Amber and Alan. If it was random, any deputy was a potential target. If not, was Alan the only target? Or was Amber also a target? Or was Alan's family a target as well? Susan was in the clinic examining a toddler when she heard loud voices coming from the reception room. Is Susan Allen here? There was a quiet reply, I'm sorry sir, I can't tell you that. The loud voice, I demand to see Susan Allen. The receptionist, Dottie Jacobs, replied, quietly, I'm sorry sir, there is no Susan Allen here. Now please leave before I call the sheriff. The loud voice again, all right, I'm going, but if I find out you're lying to me, you will all be sorry. Dottie stepped into Susan's examination room, you heard that? Susan replied, yes, it sounded like Seth's brother, Chester Allen. Please call the sheriff. Chester is a very dangerous man. Dottie called the sheriff and relayed Susan's message. Sheriff Murdoch asked to speak to Susan, but the receptionist said that she was in the middle of examining a toddler. Perhaps she could call after this appointment. Sheriff Murdoch replied, I'll be right there. Please ask Dr. Smith to give me a few minutes. To which Dottie replied, I'll tell her sheriff. About 10 minutes later, Sheriff Murdoch walked into the clinic, accompanied by a woman carrying a satchel. The sheriff waved at Dottie and walked to the back of the clinic. The woman stepped over to the receptionist's desk. "Hi, I'm Susie Varney, and I am a police sketch artist. Sheriff Murdoch has asked me to get a description of that loud man so that I can make a sketch for identification purposes." The two ladies began to work to make that sketch. Sheriff Murdoch walked back to Susan's office. "Susie, tell me about this, Chester Allen. I believe you said that he was a dangerous man." As he looked, Susan turned very pale. The sheriff of Henry County arrested him several times, and he spent about 8 years in state prison for violent crimes. Sheriff Murdoch asked, "What kind of violent crimes?" Susan replied, "I don't know. I only met Chester once. Seth went to his trial, but never told me what he was guilty of." The sheriff replied, "Well, I guess I can call Sheriff Kent over in Henry County and ask him." "Susie, I have a police artist with Dottie to try to get a picture of this guy. Would you look at the drawing and add your recollections, too?" Susan said that she would, especially if it will help protect my Alan. Sheriff Murdoch raised one eyebrow. "Your Alan?" She smiled. "Yes, my Alan. I only lend him to you." John grinned. "You're really hooked on that deputy of mine, ain't you?" She replied, "Oh, John, he is the best thing that ever happened to me. And he loves Roger, too." The sheriff said, "I believe that you and Roger are the best thing that ever happened to Alan. He seems to be very happy, not as uptight as he used to be. He's one fine cop. Be proud." Susan replied with tears in her eyes, "Oh John, I am so very proud. God gave me a wonderful man." Sheriff Murdoch left, and Susan went out to look at the composite drawing. Dottie, Susie, and Susan examined the drawing. Susan made a couple of suggestions and finally approved the drawing. Sheriff Murdoch called Sheriff Kent and got him to fax Chester Allen's mugshot and rap sheet. When the mugshot was compared to Susie's sketch, it was very accurate. Sheriff Murdoch had also relayed the threat to Sheriff Kent and asked him to tell his deputies. Both sheriffs expressed hatred for the black tape on their badges. Susan drove home to find Alan and Roger in the kitchen, making dinner. Alan sat and directed Roger in his culinary efforts. Susan smiled. "What are you guys making?" Roger piped up, "I'm making lasagna." Alan replied, "Well, it's frozen, but we are concocting a salad, garlic bread, and the lasagna. I hope you like Italian." Susan leaned on the counter. "I've got the two most wonderful guys in the world." "But Alan, are you doing too much? You're not overdoing, are you?" Alan sighed an exaggerated sigh. "No. I'm just having fun with our son." Susan smiled. "Okay, I'll set the table. How long before dinner is ready?" Roger answered, "Give me 10 minutes. Okay? Dad, you go sit at the table, I'll take care of everything." Susan answered, "And I'll handle the lasagna, it's hot, and I don't want you to get hurt." Roger frowned. Mom, I can do it. Please?" She answered, "Well, okay. Just be careful." The little family had lasagna, garlic bread, and salad. Susan and Alan had coffee, and Roger a big glass of cold milk. They talked, laughed, and even sang there at the table as they feasted on Roger's efforts. Dinner was just about over, and Susan and Roger started to clear the table when Alan started, "Shush, I heard something." Before anyone could move, Chester Allen stepped into the room, holding a .45 revolver, pointing the gun at Roger. He shouted, "Stop." Everybody froze. Tears running down his face, he cried, You're the cop who killed my brother, ain't you?" Alan stared into Chester's eyes. Yes, I am. But I didn't kill your brother. I killed a raging deranged homicidal maniac.